Colonel Atwood, you're too kind. I'd get out of bed for you any time. Colonel Jim Atwood was a man of varied interests. He was the first person in America to cultivate water chestnuts on any considerable scale, having planted 50 acres of them in a former rice paddy south of Savannah. But that was just a hobby. Atwood was primarily an entrepreneur and trader who dealt in everything from storage tanks to damaged merchandise. He had been known to produce his American Express card and buy, sight unseen, the contents of entire warehouses and ocean-going freighters. He had bought and sold 119 water-damaged sports cars in one deal and 400 tons of squash dates in another. One of Colonel Atwood's many interests was the subject of his book, Edge Weapons of the Third Reich. At the time the book came out, he had cornered the market in Nazi daggers, swords and bayonets. He had bought 60 German arms factories together with the stocks of abandoned Nazi weapons. He also owned Hitler's personal silverware, heavy oversized pieces with AH engraved in a slender sans serif. Serena batted her eyes at Colonel Atwood. Are you carrying any of your crap daggers tonight, Colonel? Nope, only my trusty sidearm, said Atwood. He took a small revolver out of his pocket and held it in his palm. Know what this is? Of course I do, said Serena. My late husband blew his brains out with one of those. Oh, said a bone-thin woman standing next to Serena. So did mine. I'll never forget it. The woman was Alma Knox. The woman was Alma Knox Carter, a convenience store heiress who lived across Monterey Square. I was fixing myself a drink in the kitchen. Gunsmoke was on the TV, and I heard a shot. Naturally, I didn't think anything of it. I thought it was part of a TV show. But I walked into the foyer and I saw Lyman sprawled out on the floor with a pistol in his hand. Colonel Atwood's revolver caught the attention of Dr. Todd Fulton. 22 Magnum, huh? Not bad. I carry this little number. Dr. Fulton reached into his pocket and took out a black leather wallet. The wallet had a hole through the middle. The crescent curve of a trigger could be seen along the edge of the hole. It's a 22 Derringer in disguise, he said. If a mugger holds me up and demands my money, all I have to do is pull out my wallet and payday. My word, said Mrs. Carter. Dr. Fulton pocketed his wallet. My wife carries a 38, he said. So do I, said Anna brightly. I'll tell you one thing, Mrs. Carter said. If I had so much as touched that gun in Lyman's hand, they'd have charged me with murder surely as I'm standing here. Mrs. Carter was so frail, one might have doubted she had the strength to lift a gun. Someday I will shoot a man, said Serena. God knows I've already tried. She lifted a pearl-handled revolver out of her purse and held it daintily by its chrome-plated muzzle. Just ask my former sweetheart, Shelby Gray. I wanted like hell to shoot him. I begged him to let me do it. I didn't want to kill him, of course. I just wanted to shoot him in the toe, give him something to remember me by. But the coward wouldn't hold still. I blew a hole in the air conditioner. You shot him? Said Mrs. Carter, wide-eyed. I missed. How fortunate. Serena sighed. Not for dear Shelby. Now he has nothing of any permanence to remind him of my love. Still, I am very much afraid I will have to shoot a man one day, and it won't be in the toe. My husband left me priceless jewels, as everybody knows, and certain individuals would love to get their hands on them. I live in fear of burglars day and night. That's why I always have this little beauty close at hand. When I'm home, I keep it by my bed. Serena glanced at Colonel Atwood. "And when I leave the house, I put it in my purse. But any time I feel the bastard's about to spring, I just stash it between my boobs." Serena tucked the revolver into her bosom and lifted a fresh martini from a passing tray. Feeling in need of a drink myself at this point, I intercepted the waiter as he came in my direction. Two other guests, a man and woman, stepped up and helped themselves too. "It was a crime passionnel," the woman was saying, "so I don't think it counts. You know, a lover's quarrel. These things happen. It ain't the same as murder." "My dear," said the man, "it may have been a crime of passion, but I know 3 people who served on that grand jury. They've seen the evidence, and I gather it's going to be sticky for Jim." I turned my back and looked in the other direction, but at the same time I moved closer to the couple in order to hear them better. The man lowered his voice. "First of all," he said, "I'm told that the crime laboratory came up with some disturbing results. There was no gunpowder residue on Danny Hensford's hands. That means he couldn't have fired the gun at Jim, as Jim claims he did." "Good God," the woman claimed. "The location of the bullet wounds also appears to be at odds with Jim's scenario of self-defense," the man said. "One bullet entered his chest, which sounds all right, but another hit Hansford in the back. A third one hit him behind the ear. So the way it looks, Jim shot him once in the chest, then stepped around the desk and shot him twice more as he lay face down on the floor, in a sort of coup de grace." "How dreadful," the woman said. "You mean it wasn't self-defense?" "I'm afraid it doesn't look that way. The fingerprint analysis is even more damaging. The gun found under Hansford's hands had no fingerprints on it at all, even though it had been fired. This means somebody wiped them off. So it begins to look as though Jim shot Danny, then got a second gun and fired a few shots from where Danny had been standing, to make it look like Hansford had fired the gun. Then it seems he must have wiped his fingerprints off the gun and put it under Danny's hand." "I'm feeling faint," the woman said. "What do you think will happen to Jim?" "Just what I told him when I arrived here tonight. He'll get off." "But how is that possible?" the woman asked. "A good lawyer can challenge the evidence and maybe even turn it around to the defendant's advantage, and Jim has good lawyers. That's why I think he'll get off. That and because of his standing in the community." Having delivered his private assessment of the case, the man changed the subject, and I drifted into the hallway, where Williams and his mother were standing in a small circle of guests. Blanche Williams had driven in from Gordon, Georgia, where she had lived all her life. Now in her late 70s, she was a tall woman, thin as a stork, not a hair out of place in the arrangement of tight white curls that covered her head like a snowy cap. She stood shyly with her hands clasped in front of her. One of the other women was admiring the evening gown. "I thank you," Mrs. Williams said politely. "James gave it to me. Whenever he has a big party, he likes to make sure I have a new pretty dress, that there's a flower waiting for me when I get to Savannah." She glanced at her son, as if to reassure herself that she had said the right thing. "Mother is always the belle of the ball," Williams said heartily. Mrs. Williams took this as a sign of approval and was emboldened to continue. "James has given me so many pieces of jewelry until I finally got to where I told him one day, I said, 'James, I don't know how I'll ever wear them all.' And he said, 'Well, Mother, you'll just have to have more parties, and you can come to Savannah more often and wear all the things you got.' James is real good about taking me places too. He's taken me to Europe 5 times. And once he called and he said, 'Mother, we are going to leave in 3 days for London on the Concorde.' And I said, 'James, now, don't tell me that. we're not going to fly anywhere on the Concorde. And he said, yes, we are. I've already got the tickets. And I thought, my Lord, what did they cost? But then I realized pretty quick I knew James was serious, and I had to stop fussing and get busy. I had to get ready in 3 days, and I did. And sure enough, we went to London on the Concorde. Mrs. Williams spoke in a quiet rush of words, as if wanting to finish quickly and not trespass on the conversational terrain any longer than necessary. Her erect posture and the alert look in her eye suggested that despite her apologetic manner, she was a lady of considerable fibre and determination. In a few moments, Williams was drawn into a conversation with new arrivals, and Mrs. Williams and I found ourselves facing each other. I uttered a pleasantry about the festive party, and Mrs. Williams nodded in agreement. James has always had a crowd around him, she said, even when he was little. One time he got him a little picture machine that kind of flashes pictures on the wall, and he'd give little picture shows, and the other children would come over and have the best time, and he'd charge them a penny apiece. Of course, I'd have to have a little something for them to eat or drink, just to munch. That was when he was 11 or 12. When he was 13, he used to ride around the countryside on his bicycle, buying antiques to sell. That's how he started out. At first, he went to the nigger houses, and he'd buy the little oil lamps and things they didn't want. He'd pay a quarter for them, and then fix them up and sell them for 50 cents. And then he bought better things, like mirrors and furniture and whatnot, and he'd fix them in his little woodworking shop. He'd put a little ad in the paper, antiques for sale, and you'd be surprised. The ladies from Macon would come to Jordan and get him out of high school. The superintendent was so impressed. They were high-class ladies, doctors' wives and so forth. And Jim would bring them into the house, and they'd buy things right out of his bedroom. He worked his way up bit by bit, all by himself. It got to where I thought, isn't life grand? My children have turned out fine. My daughter teaches at the university, and James is doing so well in Savannah. My work is done. The Lord can take me now. But he didn't. And when James got in this awful mess, I thought this must be what God had been saving me for. The din of the party surged in volume, but Mrs. Williams did not raise her voice. She kept speaking in her quiet way, looking me straight in the eye. In fact, she appeared to be looking through me. James called me on a Sunday, right after lunch I believe it was, and he told me, Mother, I've got bad news. I had to shoot Danny. Well, I just froze. I said, Sugar, you come straight home. And he did. And when he got there, I didn't question him. I just let him talk when he felt like it, because he was so keyed up and hurt and everything else. And before long, people found out he was there. And I could tell you, people started calling. Goodness, there were so many calls, I just put them on a slip. Mrs. Williams paused as two guests stopped to say goodbye. Y'all be sure and come back again next year, she told them. Then she turned back to me. I never did trust that boy. He was kind of vague, the way he looked at you. I wouldn't tell James this, but to me, that Danny Hansford was just bad news. James brought him into the house one time. In a little bit, James went out in the back to wash his car, and I didn't see the boy. And I said, James, I don't see you. And James said, oh, that's all right, Mother. He told me he was going to walk around out front. Well, when it came time to eat, the boy was still not there. And James said, Mother, I tell you what, if Danny takes a notion to go do something. Well, when it came time to eat, the boy was still not there. And James said, Mother, I'll tell you what, if Danny takes a notion to go somewhere, he won't tell anybody about it. He'll just go. He's done it before. Well, right then I understood what the boy had done. Don't ask me how I knew. Something just told me. I had an idea that he was downtown hunting dope. Gordon's only a small town, but I figured he saw something down at the filling station on the way to the house, and he wanted to go back there and buy some dope. James found out the next day that the boy had hitchhiked all the way back to Savannah. Mrs. Williams looked down briefly as she rearranged the wadded handkerchief she'd been clutching in her hands. "Now, I'll just be frank with you," she said. "Sometimes James is too good to people. I don't know, maybe he got it from me. I can get feeling sorry for people too quick, and that's not good, because a lot of people know how to play you and get your sympathy. I know some people do James that way, and he'll get to where he feels sorry for them. He'll try to help them, like he tried to help that boy. There were times I felt like maybe I should talk to James, but being a mother, I was afraid I might be interfering. You don't want to overstep the line, so I never did talk to James the way I wish I had. James would help anybody. That's the reason I just hate to see him this mess. Why, when James sold Cabbage Island and made a bunch of money, the first thing he did was fix up my house, and then he gave my church a check for $10,000 to buy an electric organ. I just don't know. Maybe this mess is going to be a lesson. I believe it's going to make James realize that he's got to think of himself sometimes." Mrs. Williams smiled as her son reappeared at her side. "Well, I'll shush now," she said. "What have you two been talking about?" he asked. I was saying how everything's going to work out just fine, James." Mrs. Williams' answer was drowned out by the congenial hub around her. "I'm sorry, Mother, I didn't hear you." Mrs. Williams took a deep breath, and for the first time all evening she raised her voice a little. "I said everything is going to work out just fine." "Of course it is, Mother," he said. "It always has, and it always will."